Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. This is a creator-owned spotlight episode. We're going to be talking about a campaign that's going on Zoop. One of my favorite creators, one of my favorite people. Joining me once again on the podcast, Patrick Horvath. Hey, Patrick, thanks for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you're a longtime listener, you're like, wait, Patrick Horvath, where do I know that name? Yes, we had him on before. We had him on to talk about his IDW series, Beneath the Trees, Where Nobody Sees. And if you're like, wait, why does that sound familiar? I would say it's the number one breakout hit from indie comics last year into this year. So I have to congratulate you, man. I mean, I know
Oh,
you were
thank you.
nervous when we were on the first time. You're like, I don't know if people are going to get it. People got it, and they continue
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah, it was overwhelming in the best way possible. And I just didn't I had no presumptions that people would connect with it as much as they have. And are continuing to do so. And it's like it's building,
Yeah.
which is incredible. It's the hugest, boost to your self-esteem to be able to take a chance and have people be like, yeah, yes, murder bear, yeah. So,
Yeah, exactly. I get
you
it. I
know,
get it. And here's what's interesting. Here's what I've kind of discovered about your work, both in reading that and then the project we're going to talk about today, Free for All. There are these themes, right? Like, okay, you can read Beneath the Trees, Where Nobody Sees, as like this procedural or like this Dexter crossed over with, Richard Scarry, Busy Animals kind of thing, and just read it for the entertainment value. But if you want to go deeper, there's stuff there about, what does it mean to be domesticated? What does it mean to be wild? And you take that another step further, and it's about kind of freedom and independence and charting your own destiny. Obviously in a very dark and horrific way with cute
yep,
animals,
yeah, 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 yeah,
but
yeah.
but there are some real like valuable things that kind of reflect on our society. And then, I heard about this free for all project, and I got a chance to look at a few of the preview pages. And now all of a sudden we're talking about the haves and have nots, which again, very meta. These are just really interesting themes and topics to discuss that are being presented in a very enjoyable fashion in terms of a cool story. So I got to give you props. Why don't you let
Well,
our
thanks.
listeners know?
I really appreciate hearing all of that. It is, uh, I think the thing that you sort of sussed out was those little hooks are definitely what brought me to, had it stick in my mind. But I'm always very interested in just using that as sort of the sugar to kind of get in the more interesting, weird, maybe not as like
Right.
sellable stuff into it. To kind of use as just sort of the way to discuss and kind of explore stuff and not really like preach anything so much as have an interesting like discussion of these elements that are kind of part of the human condition and really weird facets of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You're not preaching, you're not standing on your soapbox, and you're not saying, okay, this is how it should be, or this is the answer. You're simply posing the question or trying to start the discussion, as it were, which I think there's a lot of value to that.
Sure. Well, yeah, I do too. I mean, I appreciate hearing that that was the intention. I'm really glad to hear that it's working.
Yeah, so why don't you let our listeners know? So when this comes out, everybody, just let me say this first. When this comes out, the campaign will be live on zoop.gg. There's a link in the show notes. You can go and check out what Free for All is all about. But why don't you give the elevator pitch, Patrick? Let our listeners and our viewers know what's Free for All about.
So Free for All is set in a world that's sort of like in the not too distant future of Earth and like a version of Earth where basically it's almost like right on the edge of becoming like the Star Trek version of Earth where everything's sort of just been taken care of, right? There's like money's like almost non-existent, but it still does exist. But for most folks, they're uh their day-to-day just existence, like all of the sort of concerns about living have all essentially been taken care of by the this world league that kind of just funds subsidizes everything. And the money from this comes from, the billionaires of Earth. Once you are even richer than that at this point, but like once you sort of reach a certain level that's deemed rich by the league, they have a lottery. Out of that lottery, basically if you're chosen, you can either divest half of your asset and give this to the league to help fund, humanity, or you can keep everything, but you have to fight to the death for it. And so that's the main setup. And amongst that backdrop, we follow these two, you know, sort of like billionaire gladiators who are basically like this, sort of psychopath real estate magnate, Ted Brooks, and then his ex-wife, and you can basically find yourself, following this almost like revenge story uh, of the Luella's, basically reclaiming her own. It's a lot of things, but it's redemption in a way.
So cathartic, right? For those of us that are scraping by, we those billionaires out there with more money than they could possibly spend. And yeah, I mean, certainly it's shifted since, you and I were very young. I was just reading this article today about the way Hollywood has changed, and they were talking about studio executives. And back in the 60s, they made, I think, like 6 or 7 times what the kind of median worker pay was. And now when you look at studio executives, they make like 3,000 times what the median.
It's runaway. Yeah, it's a runaway.
Yeah, it's insane. Nobody needs, that much money.
I
Uh,
wish I could remember who I could attribute this sort of paraphrase quote to, but it was something to the effect of like it's impossible to find like a moral billionaire.
yeah,
The idea that like to have that much money, sort of almost as a prerequisite, is that you have to shed like a certain amount of humanity to get to that point,
yeah.
right? And I mean I kind of this story came to me at a time when it just felt like there were a lot of like it definitely came in the turmoil of like the late 2010s, right? And then the sort of crazy 2016 political cycle and all of that stuff, and a lot of it was just to sort of take a step back from a lot of the sort of really vicious stuff that was being hurled at each other online. And that a lot of the bigger problems, it just seemed like it was almost like fighting over crumbs. Like we're sitting here just like in many desperate situations. And a lot of it is just because we're like fighting over crumbs of what like a lot of a very few people are making, and we're sort of at that mercy of just who gets this money. Anyway, and so like it's not, it's definitely not saying like this. I'm not promoting like anybody like fight to the death for our amusement, whatever. But it just seemed like it's just such an audaciously ridiculous scenario of income inequality, just globally,
Yeah.
that it just should not be. Like, it should not be. Like I'm very much, it's just kind of ridiculous. So I kind of felt like having an equally ridiculous remedy for that would be the best way to just sort of, have fun with it.
Well, yeah, again, I think there's like a catharsis to that, right? Like
Yeah,
so we're not saying that this should actually happen, but
right.
the ridiculous levels of wealth they have, it's like maybe it needs a ridiculous solution. Okay, well, not really, but yeah, there's that whole idea of, you talk about fighting over crumbs, this whole idea of certainly in our uh, society right now in the US where it's, right versus left or blue versus red or what have you. And it's like the powers that be, as long as they keep us divisive and fighting against each other, we don't focus on the
100%.
there are people that have way more than they deserve. Like,
Completely. It's very much, yeah, all of this small stuff that everybody kind of keeps sweating very much feels like it's just a distraction.
yeah,
And small stuff in the sense of like in the scope of things. Like I feel like if everybody just sort of took those stressors away of just being able to just exist
yeah,
and not feel bad about the fact that like, your government would help you, because we're all on the same team,
yeah. It's a little
you
live
know.
and let live. I have more in common with, some, farmer who's super conservative in the Midwest than I do with Elon Musk, right? Because
Sure.
he's struggling to pay his bills. Maybe I'm struggling to pay my bills. Elon Musk, he's not struggling to pay for anything,
He's like player number one in the video game of his
Yeah,
life. Like he's
yeah.
not
To do
concerned about any of us.
Yeah, whatever he wants. Like you mentioned coming up with this in the late 2010s. It's been released before. Is that accurate as a digital comic?
Yeah, correct. I just put it out as a a digital download for anybody to check out for around 2020, like right in the middle of the pandemic, first year of it, just to have something for people to chew on. And that was the intention for a long time. And then in the wake of it, I'd had uh, you know, people coming back to me saying like, "This was awesome. Would you ever think about doing a print run?" Um, and it just never really was an opportune time. I did want to. It's just again like I just didn't I didn't really have the wherewithal to put together like a Kickstarter campaign and kind of have to handle all of the different elements that were part of that. And it's just because that's a whole nother job. And I
Yeah.
just didn't have the time for it. And and so on. But I mean, after Beneath the Trees, I've gotten a lot more attention, obviously, which was great. But I ended up getting in conversation with Zoop, and then the discussion started pretty quick. They were just immediately like, "So has anybody put out Free for All yet? Like, have you published this yet?" I was like, "I haven't. I would love to do a print run." And then the conversation just sort of naturally grew from there.
Well, that's great because I can't wait to get my hands on it. I did kind of go looking. I was like, can I find it? I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to look. I want to hold it in my hands. I want to experience it. I want to read it. And, obviously Jordan and Eric of Red Zoop are great guys to work with. Because here's the other thing, right? You're such a fantastic creator. You got to make hay, while the sun is shining. So you got a little attention because of Beneath the Trees. So now's the time. We don't want you to waste any creative energy or any of your hours of your day packaging and shipping. We want you writing and drawing stories. Right? So that's what Zoop's great at, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're great at. There was the perfect solution for it, just because of all that stuff, and also just helping to manage the whole campaign and everything. They're just kind of a full package deal, so it was honestly like a no-brainer. And they'd been on my radar for a while. I most recently had finally received my copy of Full Tilt from Jason Copeland,
Oh yeah.
which he had done through Zoop, and that was awesome. And it was just it's a great book. So it was just, and at that point we'd already been talking a bit, but it was just further reassurance that this was a good team to be working with.
Yeah, so here's the other thing, everybody. This is done, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's done.
we don't have to wait for fulfillment or obviously you're an artist and a writer. So a lot of times, it's not a situation where we're waiting on art or anything, but this is already done. So it's just a situation where once the campaign's done, you're just going to send it off to the printer. You know what the print run is, and then hopefully it'll get fulfilled really quickly for all the backers, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it depends. I mean, it basically depends on turnaround for printing, based on what the quantity.
Right.
So if we're going to do offset printing, it just depends what part of the world we're going to print that in. And then it turns into just like logistics of print delivery, if it has to go through overseas or not. And then the timeline will be based on that.
So with this already being done, and I think you remember I remember you telling me you work digitally, right? So
No, I did all, well, here's the thing. This is it's so Beneath the Trees is all just gouache,
okay.
and ink, traditionally. And then this was ink on Bristol board and then colored in Photoshop for like half of it. And then to sort of expedite the whole process, because I was getting kind of frustrated with it, I was like, maybe if I just did the whole thing. So then like half of it is digital. And so I do have original pages for like the first half of the run of this little novella. And then the rest of it, yeah, the rest of it is all digital.
So
So it's
let's
kind of
talk.
across the whole board. It's a nice like spectrum
Yeah.
of
So let's talk about some of the rewards. Then are we going to be offering original art? Is there going to be opportunities for commissions? What else can you get besides just the book free for all?
Yeah, it'll definitely be original art from what I do have. And then also there will be commissions along with signed like book plates and remarks as well that'll be brought in. And then also some exclusive like Beneath the Trees books as well that are sort of like more kind of con specific stuff that we've had. Um, because there's been some really cool exclusive variants that have been put together for that. And I have some of those that I'd love to offer. So some like kind of really exclusive ones, and then some of the more general stuff that's been showing up at conventions.
Wow, that's fantastic. So something for everybody. So be sure everybody remember, link in the show notes, go check it out. Whether Free for All sounds like a perfect book for you or you're a big fan of Beneath the Trees. The other thing that I'll remind everybody, as I always do when we talk about these creator-owned campaigns, maybe this sounds like it's right up your alley, or you'd love to get some exclusive Beneath the Trees, but things are tight right now and you're just not able to join the campaign. The other way you can help Patrick out is to share this on social media. Get it out there on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, let your local comic shops know. So anybody who does want to become part of the campaign has a chance to join before all the cool rewards are gone and before the campaign is done. So obviously we'd love it if you join the campaign and get to check out this great book, but we understand that not everybody has the means all the time. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Patrick, to go back to talking about
Hmm.
the themes of this. Um,
Hmm.
and as you were thinking about it and putting it together, and I love how you describe it as kind of just on the edge of where things are that bright Star Trek future. As you were developing it, as it was, coming out of you as a creator, did anything change? Because it is, as you said, you want to make it entertaining, but it is in a way it affects us all, right? The things that we're talking about, like just the ability to live. So I guess what I'm asking is, as you were sort of cathartically putting this out and creating it, did it sort of grow organically in your mind, and thus onto the page as you were creating it? Did it become a bigger story, a smaller story? Did it change in any way?
I feel like as I was working through it, the I feel like I mean, the story very much coalesces around Luella Dominguez and her kind of coming to terms with this, her ex-husband and this their backstory of how it went. And their backstory kind of spreads out uh or or lays, you know, very stark divisions of the people that still kind of cling to this old notion of capitalism and then the people that are evolving, right? And then the idea that it would break, this isn't like a spoiler or anything, but like the idea that like something like that could, like a relationship between two people could break on that divide
Mm.
where you could, find those that were like the love wasn't strong enough for something like that, right? To survive like a split like that. And so, and to me, as I was putting this story together, and it really is like Loyola's story, what is it about, it kind of feels like this sort of weird brainwashing to me of like, of what's really important, just in terms of, your life and what that is. And the idea of, having outrage based on something that feels like a lot more necessary, like love versus like versus money or whatever that sort of thing is, or status, etc. Um, and I think that was probably the biggest direction I wasn't expecting it to go in when I was putting it together. I initially was just like I was and also inspired by what is Scott McCloud's weird one-off, the oversized one-off of the I wish I could remember. I'm just totally blanking on the title of it right now. You know what I'm talking about? It's the oversized, like two superheroes just beating the crap out of each other in the city.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the name.
Yes. What is it called?
I've never read it. I don't. Yeah, I'll look.
It's Oh, it's awesome. I'm just gonna totally hate myself for not remembering it right now. It's like a one-word title. It's incredible. Like, look it up. We're gonna figure it out
Yeah,
because I feel like it's worth telling the people about it. If
yeah,
you don't know about this, you need to search it out.
yeah.
Um,
Right now.
uh, it's basically just all it is the one scenario of these two superheroes just beating the crap out of each other and destroying the city, not unlike the end of the Snyder Superman
Right.
first one. Not to say that that was lifted per se, but the it's definitely very similar, and it's like kind of, but it very much like is reveling in this destruction, right? It's like it's very much like just kind of it's not like celebrating it necessarily, but it's very much just kind of like it's kind of ridiculous how much this is, you know what I mean? And the fact that it was also just an oversized book, etc., from McLeod, like, God, I wish did you find out the thing?
Roy? Is that the one?
Yes, it's Destroy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yes.
It goes.
Scott McCloud's
Yeah,
Destroy.
yeah, not
If you can find a copy of it in the wild, like get it.
yeah
Uh,
from Eclipse and kind of what kind of appropriate as well, right? Like what we're talking about, where that one is like so overblown cartoon violence to the point of ridiculousness to kind of make a commentary on why are we entertained by this type of
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I kind of felt like in a way of, you know, just celebrating that aspect of it would kind of bring it into question in terms of why this, like, yes, we live in the world of free for all is very much like this, um, you know, kind of utopian sort of world, but at the same time, like it's everybody essentially like very streamlined televised violence, almost like a Running Man kind of scenario of the future, right?
right.
But the it's problematic, and like everybody is like people are just watching it everywhere. And you do see, and I kind of paint the picture early on, and just like totally in the periphery, but there are a small minority of people that are protesting the actual violence and the fact that a lot of this killing is sort of part of it. And I also this came out there was a book, a novel called Chain Gang All Stars that came out a couple of years ago. So it's a little bit after I did this, but it's a very similar sort of like modern gladiator scenario in a sort of dystopian future, but it follows is very much like the Running Man. It's all convicts that are sort of forced to fight each other, etc. But I mean, I think there's something about that gladiator spectacle, and then to throw like a modern, sort of layer onto it all, where it's like it's on everybody's smartphones and it's kind of wherever, and people are sort of able to celebrate the minutia of ways of people being horribly, eviscerated for the entertainment of everyone was something that felt like very cynical, but at the same time, like not that far-fetched.
Yeah,
So,
not far-fetched. Not far-fetched at all, especially because it's these guys that have so much and
right. And they've just been villainized
yeah,
just immediately. And I
yeah.
think that sort of villainy is something that like just happens daily, you know. It's just nuts. So I felt like it would be, yeah, it all kind of felt necessary to have in there. Especially in, like I think I drew the lion's share of this in 2018, 2019. And it just, I mean, it hasn't like it's not like it's stopped or anything. It kind of feels like
Yeah.
we've just kind of been continuing on this path.
Yeah, it's crazy, especially because you mentioned brainwashing earlier, right? And that
Hmm.
there's certainly it's almost like at least in the U.S., where we live, this indoctrination when you're young, especially in the generation where we're in, where you're sold this bill of goods that you can just bootstrap capitalism your way up to being super successful, and it's just not reality. It just
No,
really,
it's not.
as you get older, you realize, or at least I've realized that, man, there's a there's a personal price to capitalism. The people like it affects people like in
Yeah.
real ways of keeping the people that are below the poverty line below, and the people the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and that's just kind of the market forces of capitalism. But yet when we were growing up, we were taught, oh, capitalism, it's just the greatest, and the whole thing, U.S. against USSR and the Cold War and what have you. We were sort of brainwashed in a way.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like every country by and large has its own perspective on, that a lot of people have on everything. And I do feel like that was a big part of ours. I think that a lot of that, I mean, it's weird to think about. I mean, I kind of feel like a large portion of what we're all still kind of dealing with was set in place probably around like 1980 or something like that is kind of how I feel. And we're, a lot, and especially like the 90s and the deregulation of a lot of stuff and a lot of things being privatized, given out to, other part of the global economy. And then a lot of people not being able to, depend on basically jobs that could get them either union hours, et cetera. Like it's very much, a weird, it kind of, a lot of it. There was a moment it felt like with Carter where like maybe we could be
Right.
somewhere.
Yeah.
But a lot of the 80s stuff kind of really took a huge foothold. And I think that a lot of that I kind of would go into that sort of indoctrination of just kind of this is the way forward. It's kind of Christian. And it has to do with like, America being number one and we're fighting the bad stuff and we're, protecting our own and et cetera. And we're, I feel like Superman 4 Quest for Peace was part of that. Like, it just feels like a weird, it's kind of like a nice shiny wrapper to put on it that makes us feel like we're headed in the right direction. It's just, it is a really strange time. I grew up in the 80s very much. And so I think all that stuff had a very strong effect on me, especially as I get older. And there's an interesting moment when you reach your parents' age when you can kind of start like thinking about what they were doing at your age then.
Yeah.
And you're also sort of thinking about how how things went. And then you have this incredible, weird hyper awareness through technology now and just like the access to information of what was actually going on. And there's like several books about it probably, and about whatever facet it is that you're looking into. And then, and it's just sort of like so strange to have all that stuff laid bare now.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it doesn't seem like there's anything we can do about that. So like,
Yeah.
so it's again, like I think a lot of that cynicism kind of probably comes from that in terms of myself, like, and then to just kind of have this weird hyper violent, expression of it.
It's like this closet nationalism that happened in the 80s, right? Like we were all so gung-ho to be American, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, when you look at and the way the rest of the world saw us then, everybody wanted to move here or whatever, and then yeah, there's that perception and then there's reality. Um, and so to get back to free for all, the other thing that I wanted to ask you about here, so often we're told as writers, write what you know, write what you know. Um, you're not a billionaire. You're not a
No,
triple.
yeah.
You're not even a millionaire. You haven't sold enough copies of Beneath the Tree yet to be a
No
millionaire.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's your in with these characters, right? Like you have to relate to them as a writer first, so then we can relate to them as readers. Um, so what was your in? Was there any particular challenge for the characterization for some of these billionaire gladiators that you were?
I mean, with Ted Brooks, Ted Brooks is sort of the main kind of, he's their main sort of antagonist, but is also like kind of the weird protagonist in a way in the beginning. And again, I wanted that to be complicated
Mhm.
because you essentially have like one horrible person fighting another person that kind of feels like what they did was even worse somehow. And
Yeah.
so like, and then you want to see the comeuppance, right?
Right.
And the idea of having like, I guess part of it was also having like uh I'm sorry, this is totally a detour from what you're saying. I promise I'll get back to it. But I have a problem with righteous violence. I don't think the violence is ever righteous, and I feel like it's very problematic to start talking about stuff in a way that like, well, that was deserved
Yeah.
and but this one wasn't. And I was like, well, I think all of it's probably bad. Like it feels like there shouldn't be a conversation necessarily where there's like acceptable violence. And so I feel like it, and I mean, that should kind of be the goal anyway, right? So it felt like um, to have, a character like Ted Brooks, who is basically just kind of tapped into by the rest of society to kind of deal this righteous violence, and then also, become kind of the main, antagonist for the whole second half was a lot of it was a very similar thing to me to doing uh, Samantha with Beneath the Trees. And so it kind of felt like it was, I don't have any perspective on serial killers, and I don't necessarily have any pathways into the mindset per se. And it's the same thing with
Gosh.
billionaires, et cetera, except to say that they're both like psychos to me. Like I feel like there's a certain psychopathy that's involved with the pursuit of that much wealth or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and it felt like there was a certain amount of, weird entitlement that kind of felt like it transcended a lot of the moral, uh things that might stop you from pursuing that much wealth or whatever. And it kind of, weirdly, like it struck me that if there was this scenario, those that thrived would be the ones that really embraced it,
Right.
and that they would probably be undefeated. And in the case of Ted Brooks, like he's done like dozens of these. And it's because he's not necessarily like waiting for another lottery for them to throw him in the mix. He's like, he'll go for it because he kind of feels like it's almost like him, taking pride in the fact that he is fighting to the death to defend this wealth, which just feels, it's madness, but it's like that's that special brand of madness.
Yeah, it's a natural extension of what got him to where he is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's got to be, again, you're not, relating to these people, serial killers or ultra wealthy on a one-on-one level. But as a writer, as a creator, it's got to be fun, right? There's got to be a freedom in writing somebody who's sort of literally capable of anything in a way, right?
Yes. I mean, it's yep. I find that it's definitely uh it's freeing in the sense of it kind of anything goes, but then it also becomes very compelling to me to find like what their lines are that they won't cross.
Right.
And in many cases a lot of those are based on principles more so than other like actual factors facing them, which kind of turns into like these ridiculous sort of scenarios. But I feel like that's to me the juicy part of like writing these characters is just kind of having them bump up against things where they will not accept something and then kind of, take these, over the top, you know, reactions.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the artistic style, right? So anybody who's a big fan of Patrick, I've been reading Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. This one doesn't look, exactly the same. You mentioned kind of the watercolor, that gauche look that Beneath the Trees has. This is a different style. Can you talk a little bit about developing the look for Free for All?
Yeah, I wanted to do more traditional in the sense that like just like by that I mean like very, a lot of common comics are it's just line work and then you got a colorist that comes in Photoshop and then you are either like, doing that line work on Bristol or whatever. Or, you just basically however you want to get those lines down on the paper and then you scan it, turn those into a regular old bitmap, put that into Photoshop and then do your work on it there. And so I wanted to do that approach and I'm not as good at it. Like I struggle with that. And so I kind of just wanted to do it just to have that experience of
Mhm.
doing it. And I also I do daily drawings, or I used to all the time before I had more time. But like I would uh find myself like getting to a point where I was like, I should really learn how to color in Photoshop a lot more. And I just so I just stopped doing because I was doing like basically like ink and watercolor stuff primarily. And then I started working in Photoshop and just kind of, this was kind of a natural like, oh yeah, I should do it like a comic. Maybe I'll do like a half, maybe like a graphic novella thing. And I'll just do it all just ink and Photoshop, and maybe that'd be a fun way to go, and sort of get that experience. And then ended up doing the I came up with this idea. I was like, well, I think this might be the thing that I just kind of sink my teeth into and try and just go all the way with it.
Right.
So it's funny because like it took me like several years of like just kind of working on it in between work and other jobs that were like between the day job and then the other sort of stuff where I'd be doing other work on films, working in like either special effects stuff or previs stuff or some storyboarding or whatever. And then in between both of them, I would just kind of work on these pages. And yeah, and it was very much like after working on this, I was like, I'm just gonna go back to working in paint because I work faster and I'm happy with how this looks and everything. But it was very much like it took me a lot to get there. And I was like, well, I don't think I need to put myself through that.
Yeah, I
And
feel the same way.
on the other end is just like also working with a colorist who is awesome at that. That would be another option as well. I would be very open to that as well.
I feel the same way about Photoshop. There's times I've tried to learn it, and here's the other thing, right? Like every time I go back to learn it, a couple years have gone by, and things have completely changed since the last time.
Sure.
Gotta learn it, whatever.
Oh yeah.
My sister's a photographer, so she's like pro with it. I'm always bugging her for questions. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna use the tools I already know how to use.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's
Yes,
funny
or
too,
whatever.
because like it's just never, you just need to put in that time in the seat, you know.
Yeah.
And especially like by the time I got towards the end of this, it was a lot easier for me. But even so, I kind of realized that I liked that there's a certain, textural quality to working just analog that I found myself trying to replicate. And at that point, I was like, well, that just feels foolish. Like if I'm wanting to do this, like I should just work with the actual paper and paint if that's what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? And so it just it was funny, but it was very illuminating. Yeah, this project's really, it is funny where it sits in terms of like where I was at, because like I definitely didn't figure anything out. It was an experiment, which I feel like is good. Like I feel anytime you're doing something that is an experiment, you're heading in the right direction. I mean, it might not work but it might, and it's totally worth a shot. Um, and so yeah, the style itself just kind of came out of that kind of experimentation, and then also just trying to manage files on my own because I wanted to just put something out. So it was, I also learned how to do InDesign and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, so it was fun. It was fun for all those reasons.
Well, as a creator, I'm a big fan of yours, and one of the things that some of my favorite creators are always fond of saying, never stop learning, right? Never stop
Oh
experimenting,
God, yeah.
stop pushing
Yes.
yourself. And I know you've kind of fit that mold as well. So, yeah, it's great having you on. And again, everybody, link in the show notes. You can go and check out Free for All. There's some preview pages there. Those are the same pages that I read that immediately I'm hooked. I can't wait to read this thing. You'll probably feel the same way. And just a reminder, share it on social media as well, so we can get as many eyes on it as possible. So, as we're winding down here, Patrick, anything else to share with our listeners and viewers?
That's about it. I mean, when is this going up? Do we know when
Uh,
the
Typically, Jordan will let me know when day of launch, and so this will go out day of launch. But
awesome, awesome.
sometimes he
Um,
forgets, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
second.
So, I mean, you can always find me at patrickhorvath.com. And then I also you can reach my Substack newsletter on there to follow up on any other stuff. And then of course on social media, you can find my links on there as well.
Great. And I'll put links to the website, the Substack, and the social media in the show notes as well, everybody. So if you're having trouble finding Patrick, you can go there. And last thing I'll mention is if you happen to be at a con where Patrick is, I very much encourage you to go by and say hi. He loves to interact with fans and hear how they're enjoying Beneath the Trees. You might have to wait in line. It's a pretty big line sometimes.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, please stop by. I love saying hey. And then also, I mean, I'm going to be doing so many cons this year. So please, again, check my website and check my newsletter, and I'm going to have a list of all the ones that we'll be going to.
Okay, that's going to do it for this episode. Again, Patrick, thanks for joining me. It's always a pleasure to see you, talk to you, and again, I love it when good things happen to good people, and
Oh,
this
thanks, Ben.
it's the success of Beneath the Trees. Every time I see it on a bestseller list or some top 10, number one's going for X amount of dollars, whatever, it just makes me smile.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And to you listeners, thank you for joining us as always. We will talk to you next time.